June 1942, the United States found itself fully committed to a global war effort unlike anything in its history. In workshops and factories across America, the arsenal of democracy was churning at full capacity. But in a small corner of the General Motors Guide Lamp Division in Anderson, Indiana, something unprecedented was taking shape. Engineers huddled over blueprints for what would become one of the most unusual firearms ever mass-produced by the United States. Not a weapon of precision or durability, but one of desperate necessity and stunning simplicity. The FP-45 Liberator pistol was about to enter production, a weapon so crude that soldiers jokingly called it the gun that took longer to reload than to manufacture. This unassuming single-shot 45 caliber pistol represented a radical departure from traditional American firearms philosophy. Crafted from stamped sheet metal with a simple wooden grip, the Liberator cost approximately $2.10 to produce, about $35 in today's currency, a fraction of the $42 price tag of the standard-issue M1911 pistol. While conventional military doctrine emphasized accuracy, durability, and sustained firepower, the Liberator defied every established principle of proper weapon design. It had no rifling in its barrel, effectively making it accurate only at extremely close ranges. It featured crude fixed sights that were practically decorative rather than functional. Its tiny grip was uncomfortable to hold, and its heavy trigger pull made accurate shooting a challenge, even for experienced marksmen. Most notably, it required partial disassembly to reload after each single shot, a process that took nearly 10 seconds for a practiced user. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, these seemingly fatal flaws, the Liberator represents one of the most fascinating chapters in American military manufacturing. The story of the Liberator begins not with grand battlefield strategy, but with the desperate situation facing resistance fighters across Nazi-occupied Europe. By mid-1942, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, and much of Eastern Europe had fallen under Axis control. Local resistance movements formed quickly, but they faced a crippling shortage of weapons. Allied intelligence agencies, particularly the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, were tasked with supporting these resistance cells, but supplying them with conventional weapons presented enormous logistical challenges. Resistance fighters needed compact, concealable weapons that could be easily transported and hidden from occupying forces. Traditional military firearms were too large, too complex, and too easily traced. The solution would need to be radically different. It was in this context that the concept of a disposable single-shot pistol emerged, not as a traditional battlefield weapon, but as a tool of assassination and psychological warfare. Enter U.S. Army officer Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, who proposed the development of an extremely simple, inexpensive handgun that could be mass-produced and airdropped to resistance fighters. The concept was approved, and the project was assigned the code name Flare Projector 45, FP45, to disguise its true purpose. The U.S. Army Joint Psychological Warfare Committee believed that widespread distribution of such weapons would not only provide resistance fighters with the means to kill enemy soldiers at close range, but would also force German occupiers to maintain higher levels of security, tying down valuable troops that might otherwise be deployed to active combat fronts. The actual design work for the Liberator fell to George Hyde, a prolific firearms designer who would later contribute to the M3 grease gun submachine gun. Working alongside Frederick Sampson, Hyde created an almost absurdly simple design: a crude zinc alloy frame housing a smooth-bore barrel just 4 inches long, with a rudimentary firing mechanism and a wooden grip. The entire pistol consisted of just 23 parts, most of them stamped rather than machined. Manufacturing began in May 1942 at the Guide Lamp Division of General Motors, a company more accustomed to producing automobile components than firearms. The factory retooled its production lines and, in an astonishing feat of American industrial efficiency, produced approximately 1 million Liberator pistols in just 11 weeks, a rate of about 10,000 units per day. Each pistol cost approximately $2.10, making the entire program's manufacturing budget just over $2 million, a pittance compared to other wartime weapon systems. The Liberator's intended use dictated every aspect of its design. It was meant to be a weapon of last resort, a tool that would allow an unarmed resistance fighter to kill a German soldier at point-blank range, take the dead soldier's weapon, and then discard the Liberator. This mission profile explains many of the pistol's peculiarities. Its unrifled barrel limited effective range to about 25 feet, but was far cheaper to manufacture than traditional rifled barrels. The crude fixed sights were adequate for the intended point-blank engagements. The awkward reloading process, which required using the included wooden rod to push the spent casing out from the muzzle end, was acceptable because the weapon was expected to be used only once before being discarded. The completed Liberator package was a marvel of wartime efficiency. Each pistol came packed in a small cardboard box with 10 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition stored in the grip, accessible by removing a small plug, a cartoon-style instruction sheet showing its operation without words to overcome language barriers, and a wooden dowel for extracting spent casings. The entire package was sealed in wax paper to prevent corrosion during storage and airdrop operations. The instruction sheet itself represents a fascinating example of wartime visual communication. Using simple line drawings, it demonstrated how to load the pistol, fire it, extract the spent casing, and reload, all without a single word that might identify its country of origin or confuse non-English speakers. July 1942 saw the first shipments of Liberator pistols leave American factories bound for OSS and SOE distribution centers in England and North Africa. From there, the plan called for tens of thousands to be airdropped into occupied territories. However, the actual deployment of the Liberator proved far more limited than its designers had envisioned. Historical records suggest that relatively few were actually distributed to resistance fighters in Europe. Instead, larger numbers were sent to the Philippines, where guerrilla forces fighting Japanese occupation put them to use. The OSS ultimately determined that the logistical challenges of distributing the Liberators were greater than anticipated, and that the limited cargo capacity of aircraft could be better utilized carrying more effective weapons, explosives, or supplies to resistance groups. The Liberator's combat effectiveness remains a matter of historical debate. Its crude construction, limited accuracy, and single-shot capacity made it a poor choice for any scenario except the most desperate close-range encounter. The psychological impact, however, may have been more significant. The mere knowledge that civilians might be armed with concealed Liberators potentially forced occupying forces to maintain higher levels of alertness and security for resistance fighters themselves. Even a crude weapon offered a tangible connection to the Allied war effort and a means of potential self-defense, however limited. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Liberator program was its security. Despite manufacturing 1 million units, the project remained classified until after the war's end. Few Americans knew of its existence, and even fewer understood its strategic purpose. This secrecy extended to the name itself. While commonly called the Liberator, this name was rarely used in official documentation during the war years. At war's end, the utility of the Liberator evaporated almost overnight. With no further need for such a specialized weapon, The U.S. government ordered most remaining stocks destroyed. This wholesale disposal, combined with the weapon's inherent disposability, has made original FP-45 pistols extraordinarily rare collector's items today, often commanding prices over $1,500, more than 700 times their original manufacturing cost. The Liberator represents an interesting counterpoint to the traditional American approach to firearms manufacturing, where American gun design typically emphasized craftsmanship, accuracy, and durability, as seen in the legendary M1 Garand rifle or Colt 1911 pistol. The Liberator embraced disposability, simplicity, and mass production. It was in many ways the first truly disposable firearm, designed to be used once and discarded rather than maintained and passed down. This philosophical shift reflected both the desperate circumstances of global war and the incredible industrial capacity of wartime America. The United States could afford to manufacture 1 million single-use pistols because its factories were capable of such extraordinary output. The technical specifications of the Liberator highlight its unusual design philosophy. The pistol weighed approximately 16 ounces, 450 grams, was 5.5 inches, 14 centimeters in overall length, and fired the standard .45 ACP cartridge, the same ammunition used in the M1911 service pistol. This ammunition choice was deliberate. Using a standard military caliber meant that resistance fighters could potentially salvage additional ammunition from dead enemy soldiers. The barrel, just 4 inches long and completely smooth, unrifled, contributed to its poor accuracy. The weapon had no safety mechanism beyond a half-cock position for the hammer, another deliberate choice to simplify both manufacturing and operation. To load the weapon, users had to pull the breech block to the rear, place a cartridge in the chamber, and push the breech block forward. After firing, the barrel had to be unscrewed from the frame, and the spent casing pushed out using the wooden rod. The Liberator's manufacturing process was as revolutionary as its design. Guide Lamp Division, a company with no previous firearms experience, created an assembly line that could produce a complete pistol approximately every 6.6 seconds at peak efficiency. This was accomplished through the use of stamped sheet metal parts, rather than traditional machined components. The frame, barrel, and most internal components were made from zinc alloy, chosen for its low cost and ease of casting, rather than for durability. Only the firing pin was made of steel, as it needed to withstand the impact forces of firing. The wooden grip was typically made from cheap, easily worked woods like pine. This approach to manufacturing represented a significant departure from traditional gun-making techniques and foreshadowed the post-war trend toward greater use of stamped parts and simplified assembly processes in firearms production. The legacy of the Liberator extends beyond its direct military impact. As a case study in wartime manufacturing, it demonstrated how unconventional thinking could rapidly produce specialized tools for unique strategic purposes. The program's emphasis on extreme simplification, cost reduction, and disposability influenced later military procurement thinking. In some ways, the Liberator represented an early example of the minimum viable product philosophy that would later become common in technology development, creating not the best possible solution, but the quickest and most economical solution that could adequately address the immediate need. Today, the FP-45 Liberator occupies a curious place in firearms history. Collectors prize the few surviving examples not for their shooting qualities, which are universally regarded as poor, but for their historical significance and rarity. Museums display them as examples of wartime innovation and the industrial might of the United States. Firearms historians study them as examples of extreme design simplification. Perhaps most interestingly, the core concept of the Liberator, an extremely simple, inexpensive, concealable single-shot pistol, has seen numerous revivals in subsequent decades. During the Vietnam War, the CIA developed the Deer gun, a similar single-shot pistol intended for distribution to civilians. More recently, advances in 3D printing technology have enabled the creation of modern Liberator designs, simple plastic firearms that can be produced using consumer-grade equipment. These modern interpretations have sparked significant legal and political controversies, highlighting the enduring relevance of the original concept in asymmetric conflicts. The FP-45 Liberator stands as a testament to American ingenuity in crisis, a weapon that completely inverted conventional design wisdom, embracing weaknesses as strengths and limitations as features. It remains one of the most unusual firearms ever mass-produced by the United States government, and a fascinating example of how wartime necessity can drive innovation in unexpected directions. In an era of precision manufacturing and complex weapons systems, this crude, simple pistol reminds us that sometimes the most effective solutions are also the most basic. The gun that took longer to reload than to manufacture ultimately secured its place in history not through battlefield glory, but through the sheer audacity of its conception and the industrial might that made it possible.